Good morning. You listen to FloorDaily.net, and I'm Kemp Harr. This morning, my guest is Kermit Baker, the former Chief Economist for the American Institute of Architecture and an economist that still follows the built environment. Kermit, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Kemp. Thank you very much.
I wanted to catch up, let you tell our listeners what's going on with the economy. Let's start with the billing index. Just came out this week. The June index is up 3 points to 47.3, still under 50. But there's the inquiry number was interesting. It was up well over 50. Tell us what your read is on that.
Yeah, obviously, Kemp, we've been watching to see when that market's going to turn. Architecture firms have been reporting that billings have been flat to modestly down almost 4 years now. Not drastic, not dramatic, but certainly would like to see some growth moving forward. And so, as you suggested, a couple things we look at is, number one, new work coming into architecture firms. So the billings measures kind of work on ongoing projects. And work coming into architecture firms still declining, but only very modestly. It looks like it's just about hit bottom there, so that's a good sign. And then, as you pointed out, inquiries for future work, which is kind of a softer measure of what's going on, really shot up with the release for the June numbers that came out, as you said, just yesterday. So the optimists among us would say, maybe we're finally getting ready to turn a corner. Maybe we'll start to see some improvement in workloads at architecture firms in the near future, which will mean future work in the construction industry over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months.
Yeah. So one of the biggest issues is inflation. I mean, how much it costs anymore to do almost anything in the built environment, and that's what's holding some people back, right?
Oh, absolutely. Inflation's a big issue. I think there's some other headwinds facing the industry, but the most recent numbers from the government on producer prices suggest that inputs to construction are up 7% over the last year. Now, a lot of that's driven by just a few product lines. The metals in particular, steel, copper, aluminum, that are up really double digits and sometimes high double digits. And some of the other products not seeing any movement at all. It is tricky, and I think it's causing some problems for the industry to know where they're headed, because the ones that are up now may not be the ones that are up 6-9 months from now. It's just hard to tell what's going on. With the recent tensions with Canada, I'm concerned that lumber prices may be heading up in the future. But on the other hand, there may be deals with China or other steel producing countries that will lower some of the increases we've seen there. So it's a head scratcher, I think, number one, but it's very challenging, I think, for someone doing businesses in this industry to do any planning, because they don't know what things are going to look like a few months down the road.
The two biggest flooring categories for the commercial market are carpet and resilient, and they're both petroleum derivatives. And with oil back now up at 98, the carpet producers, the resilient producers, I don't know if they for sure, they haven't announced. I would guess that prices will go up if this Iran conflict doesn't get resolved soon, right?
Yeah, I don't see there's any way to avoid it. I mean, you can only absorb those cost hikes for a while. And I think if there's no assurances that they're going to reverse anytime soon, I think you're absolutely right, Kemp. They've got no choice other than to raise their prices.
The vertical sectors that are performing the best we're seeing some activity remodel in the back to work office environment. And we're seeing some healthcare business, some education business. So those are the bright spots, right?
Yeah, the office market's very odd because it's very weak, obviously. A lot of remote work. We've seen estimates that about 30% of work days are worked remotely. So companies need less space. On the other hand, a lot of work in converting those extra offices to other uses, and that leads to a lot of design and construction activity. And secondly, with a little excess space and limited demand, you need to be at the top of the list. So I think folks are fixing up their space to try to attract the few tenants there are. And you mentioned healthcare looking pretty strong. Education, a little bit more of a concern because the demographics there, we just don't have as many school age and college age people as we used to. So that's a concern. But let me extend that a little bit, Kemp, because the markets that really have been strong in construction over the last 5 years, there's three of them. One is data centers, the second is manufacturing, and the third are warehouses. Those three categories recently have accounted for somewhere between 35 and 40% of all building activity, non-residential building activity. And those are kind of funny niche markets if you think about it. When I talk to architects, I ask how much work do you have coming from data centers or manufacturing or warehouses? They say hardly any. I'm guessing our flooring listeners too are finding it challenging selling into those markets. I was at a conference just yesterday, Kemp, among roofing contractors, and when I went through the outlook, they said, how do we get a slice of that market? How do we get more work from manufacturing or data centers or warehousing? And I said, it's a challenge. It's because they do use different products than the ones you mentioned, healthcare or education or offices. Therefore, it's kind of challenging to break into those markets.
Before we run out of time, let's cover the housing market real quick. I know you follow the leading indicator for remodeling activity, and that was another news item that came out this week that think they're going to spend $519 billion through the middle of 2027. It's still growing, but it's growing at a very slow pace, right?
Yep. I think the good news is that remodeling is growing faster than new construction. The bad news is low single-digit growth that we're seeing there. I think on the non-residential side, reconstruction work is certainly doing better than new construction, and I think that's the same on the residential side too. The LIRA looks like it's going to be up 2% this year. That's not keeping up with inflation even. So it's leading with a plus sign, but be nice if it was a little stronger. And then next year, though, the recent release that you mentioned, they go out through mid-year 2027. And at that point, they see spending on home improvements only up 0.5 percentage point. So, as you said, it's struggling. It's still positive, still moving forward, but it's moving forward very slowly. Certainly the number one driver of home improvement spending is sales of existing homes. And that's been a challenging market recently, with mortgage rates to where they are. It's just tough for folks to justify making that move and, swapping in their low mortgage rates. So it's been a challenging market out there.
So these economists that you talk to, I know they always talk about it's going to be like this, but on the other hand, it might be like this. What's the consensus for between now and the end of the year for economic growth?
Great question. And I was just looking through the Wall Street Journal. Kemp does a quarterly survey of, economists. They go to some of the leading forecasters across the country and compile their results. And they just released the second quarter results a week ago. And, their outlook for growth in the economy is about what we're seeing now, just about 2%. So not falling off, but not improving. Inflation, they see high for this year, but maybe easing a little bit next year. The job market is weak. They're projecting only about 600,000 new jobs over the coming year. And we'd like to see that number close to 2 million or so. But with the economy growing so slowly, we haven't seen, an increase in the unemployment rate. So it seems like it's fairly stable there. I think the key question that I looked at on that survey, Kemp, was what's the probability in your mind of a recession over the next 12 months? And the average was 25%. So I would say that's an optimistic reading for these folks. I would have guessed it would be in the 30 to 40% range. So, I think the sense is we've had a lot of headwinds in the economy. We've gotten through those. We're going to have more headwinds moving forward, but it looks like there's a good chance we're going to get through those too without an economy-wide recession.
All right, Kermit. Well, I appreciate you giving us a read and telling us what you're thinking is going to happen with the economy. Again, been talking to Kermit Baker, and you've been listening to Kemp Harr and FloorDaily.net.